Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Our current session focuses on vocabulary size and coverage, key facts and figures. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would have some understanding of the vocabulary size and coverage, especially with reference to certain facts and figures. Well, my dear students, at the outset of this session, I would share an assertion made by Nation 2006. According to him, one of the ways of deciding on vocabulary learning goals in an English language learning program is to look at native speakers' vocabulary size. Now, this is a very huge claim that is made by Nation, because when we compare the vocabulary of L2 with the vocabulary of L1, in fact, the vocabulary of L1 is very huge in comparison. Well, there is an estimate that a well-educated native speaker of English knows about 20,000, and I repeat, 20,000 word families, or around 32,000 vocabulary items, excluding proper names. So this is a huge fund of vocabulary that a well-educated native speaker of English would have. So this sounds to be a very, very ambitious figure when it comes to take it as a model or as an aspiration to teach vocabulary to the learners of English as L2. Actually, to many of the linguists and researchers and educationists, this sounds to be an unrealistic goal for any L2 language learning program. It has been proposed that the vocabulary size of a highly educated non-native speaker of English is generally around 8,000 to 9,000 word families. So less than a half of that of a native speaker of English is this number of the word families that L2 learner of English as L2 would have, as compared to a native speaker who would have more than 20,000 or more than that. Another more realistic way of determining vocabulary learning goals is to identify how much vocabulary is needed in order to perform a particular activity in the target language. For example, reading newspapers or reading novels or watching movies or participating in conversations or attending and participating in seminars, etc., so on and so forth. So depending upon the nature of the task or activity that is to be performed by the non-native speaker or L2 speaker in English, the vocabulary size that is to be learnt by the learner can be determined. When deciding on the amount of vocabulary needed for L2 learners to be able to successfully engage in a particular task, it is important to consider the relationship between the lexical coverage, that is the percentage of known words in a text, and the reading comprehension. There has to have, it is necessary to have a certain amount of or a certain number of the occurrence of the lexical items that are known to the reader if reading comprehension is to be made possible. Who and Nation 2000 determined lexical coverage by replacing the low-frequency items in their text with nonsense words such that one could not be certain that they were known to the learner or not. So reading comprehension was measured using a reading comprehension test and a cued recall test. Now, what were the findings of their test? With a text coverage of 80%, 1 in every 5 words being a nonsense word, which means a word that is assumed to be a word that the learner would not be able to understand. No L2 learner was able to demonstrate satisfactory comprehension. So this was a very, very significant finding. 1 out of every 5 words, if this is not understood, the 80% of the coverage that is of the text, the learner is not able to demonstrate satisfactory level of comprehension of the text. When text coverage figure is increased to 90%, a very small number of learners demonstrated adequate or sufficient comprehension. When it was further increased to 100%, most of the learners were able to demonstrate good comprehension. So this shows the significance of the vocabulary size that is important for the learners as L2. Furthermore, analysis revealed that 98% text coverage, that is one unknown word in every 50 words, would be required for most L2 learners to achieve good comprehension of a text. So this was, the bar that was set. Nation 2006 investigated how large a vocabulary was needed to adequately comprehend a variety of written as well as spoken texts. So, for example, it was found that a vocabulary of 9,000 word families that are made from the British National Corpus BNC would be needed to read Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. So, to read this work, this much vocabulary is needed. And a vocabulary of 8,000 to 9,000 words would be needed to read other similar novels as, the texts for the L2 learners. Interestingly, a similar 8,000 to 9,000 vocabulary size was found to be needed for adequate comprehension of newspapers as well. So, be it a piece of literature or a real-life text, an authentic text like newspaper, almost the same size of vocabulary is required. When simplified texts such as graded readers designated for language learners were looked at, for example, the picture of Dorian Gray by Wilde, it was found that only 3,000 word families were needed to achieve a 98% coverage level. Of course, because they were graded according to the difficulty level of the learners. Nation thus also looked at spoken texts such as a children's movie Shrek and unscripted spoken English. So, whereas the former required 7,000 word families, the latter required a comparable 6,000 to 7,000 word families, excluding proper nouns. As a conclusion, what I would say is that when it comes to the vocabulary size and coverage, if one takes 98% as the ideal coverage or as a bar for the coverage, 8,000 to 9,000 word family vocabulary is needed to deal with most written texts, and 6,000 to 7,000 word families are required to deal with the most spoken words. So when it comes to the spoken form, comparatively lesser number of vocabulary items in the vocabulary size are needed. These vocabulary sizes might be considered as useful in the process of teaching and learning of English as a second language or as a foreign language.